thank you for joining for the Asset Management Framework 5 Core Questions webinar. I'm your speaker today, Sabrina Strauss. I am based out of Lincoln City, Oregon, so it's a small town here on the coast. I am part of the Rural Community Assistance Corporation, so I come to you from RCAC. We represent these green 13 westernmost states and territories, as you can see on the map here. Today we're going to be talking about the 5 core questions of the asset management framework. I'm going to start with an introduction to what asset management is a little bit. You're probably familiar as a lot of the sessions today do talk about asset management related topics, but we do want to do like a brief little review just to make sure anyone listening to the session is fully prepared to go through the 5 core questions. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about budget. I will refresh on some key takeaways and some resources for y'all, and then I'm sure we'll move into the Q&A session. So to get us started, we can talk about some definitions for asset management. Asset management is a long-term program to attain and sustain the chosen level of service for the life of an asset in the most cost-effective manner. You can also think of it as a method to incorporate system renewal into your capital improvement plan, which will sometimes be seen as CIP, and include risk management in your system budgeting. As you get started, one of the first things you're going to want to do is consider the different people that you'll want to bring into creating your asset management plan. So build your team, so to say. You're going to want to include different decision makers, community members, utility staff, business owners, financial staff, as well as different agency staff. So here in Oregon, we've got the Department of Environmental Quality and Business Oregon that we're definitely going to want to include as we're making decisions about our assets. These people don't need to be included in every step of the process, but it's a good idea to consider who all you could bring in to ask questions and make sure you have the best plan possible. So you might ask, what is an asset? An asset is all of your stuff. So it's your pipes, your pumps, computer programs, furniture, valves, motors, buildings, all the things you kind of think of. You can see on this list we've got tools, equipment, pipes, machinery, but we've also got operator. So your assets also include your people, so don't forget that those might be your most important asset. Some truths to keep in mind about assets is that they're not all created equally. Some failures will be detrimental, while others could be easily addressed. All assets will eventually fail, so everything in your system will at some point in time need to be replaced, and these failures directly affect your system's performance. As you might guess, asset management includes a lot of different things. It includes public relations, maintenance, personnel and training, planning, finance and rates, and all of these things are interconnected and related. You can't have good public relations without having good maintenance. You can't have sustainable finance or rates without having good planning. You can't have good maintenance without having good training. So as you can see, there's a lot of different things that interplay here. To help ease our understanding of asset management, we like to look at it as a function of criticality and condition, or a function of consequence of failure times the likelihood of failure. It can be helpful to present this information numerically so that you can rank your different assets and prioritize projects. In this example, we have one asset that is in very good condition and would have a low impact on the system if it were to fail, and another asset that would have a very high impact on the system if it fails and is very poor condition, resulting in a much higher score. This helps systems to prioritize repairs and replacements. There are many reasons to care about managing drinking water and wastewater infrastructure assets. Assets are large pieces of complicated equipment that can be very expensive. They usually last a fairly long time, so utilities want to keep them in good shape. The infrastructure in our country is aging and failing at an alarming rate, and we don't even know where all of it is. It's very important to remember not only all the large pieces of equipment that we see above ground, but also to consider the equipment that is located underground. Performing routine operation and maintenance to these assets is essential to protect public health. Malfunctioning equipment can cause people to get sick, especially the very young or very old or those with weakened immune systems. Economic development depends on reliable and safe water delivery and wastewater management, but are utilities charging enough to meet today and tomorrow's demand? The way to address these issues is asset management. To gain buy-in from utilities, from local decision makers, you'll have to advocate for the process. Your role is as much a marketer as it is a mentor, a fixer, or even the bad guy or the regulator. Asset management also leads to prolonged asset life, meeting consumer demands, budgeting that's focused on activities that are critical to sustain performance. It helps you set rates based on sound planning. It helps you meet service expectations and regulatory requirements. It also improves your response to emergencies, improving security and safety of your assets. Plus, in some areas, check with your funders, but you might even get extra points or be required to have an asset management plan or attend asset management training. So asset management can lead to better decisions, which can lead to real savings. From an assessment of Australia's advanced asset management practices, they've seen a 20 to 30% life cycle cost savings for U.S. water and wastewater utilities. So you may not see these savings immediately, but over the life of the asset, there will definitely be noticeable savings. So as we know, good management comes with a price. There are a couple questions that you'll need to always be able to answer. Why are we doing this? And what is it going to cost? Customers don't need to like the answer, but you do have the responsibility to understand why you're doing projects for your water system or wastewater system, and what's it going to cost? Why is it going to cost that much? So a couple things that asset management ties into, one of them being your capital improvement program. It's important to have a capital improvement program in place to help you monitor the condition of your assets and prioritize projects for repairs and replacement. If you wait until a line breaks or a boil water notice is needed, it can be difficult to get the assistance that you need. Funding can take a long time to prepare for and secure. When you have a robust capital improvement plan informed by good asset management, you're able to anticipate funding needs in advance and pursue the appropriate funding resources. So I've got an example here in Hershey, Pennsylvania, of how capital improvement plans have helped their local government obtain funding. This is for their bridge over the Southern Railroad in Dauphin County. So through capital improvement planning, the local officials in and around Hershey, Pennsylvania, identified this structurally deficient bridge's importance to the community. 12,000 vehicles per day cross that bridge, and that includes trucks that deliver precious Hershey chocolates from the factory across the railroad to America's eager hands. Local officials put together a group of stakeholders to pursue funding for the project, which included local business leaders, and after more than a decade of hard work, the group had assembled a funding package from multiple sources to make this $10 million project a reality. The county has successfully used capital improvement planning for the past 25 years to replace all of its structurally deficient bridges. You really have to have all your ducks in a row when you apply for funding, said the county commissioner. You have to show exactly why the project is needed, who it will benefit, and how it will be accomplished. Another important plan that asset management ties into is your emergency response plan, which helps your system address and prepare for both anticipated and unexpected problems. So the asset management helps your utility define which assets are the most critical to maintaining water service, and your ERP is going to require identification of these critical components so that response can prioritize restoring the essential services. Your asset management plan gives you a good head start with this list. The asset management framework assesses the likelihood and consequence of asset failure. This ties into your emergency response plan, especially the vulnerability assessment aspect of it, helping you to prioritize which threats and failure scenarios you should plan for first. Asset management also helps you to highlight life cycle costs and anticipate capital needs. It also helps you to prioritize and reinvest for planning for system sustainability. Emergency response planning doesn't end at the response. The asset management of it helps you plan for recovery, replacement, and future mitigation to avoid repeating the same emergency. So now that I've shared some of the importance of asset management and how you can use asset management for your system, I'm going to dive into these 5 core questions. This comes from EPA's Asset Management, a Best Practices Guide. It's a good starting point for any size water system. It walks you through all the major activities associated with asset management and can be implemented at the level of sophistication reasonable for a given system. The 5 questions provide the foundation for many asset management best practices, so you may already be a little bit familiar with them, and you're probably going to see them over and over again as you get get through the asset management process. The first step is to evaluate the current state of your assets. Some of this information may be difficult to track down, but you can use estimates as necessary. Over time, you'll rehabilitate, repair, and replace assets, and your inventory will become more and more accurate. Evaluating the current state of your assets could be the most data-intensive step of your asset management process. When you're just getting started, don't be so worried about getting every single tiny piece perfect. You can always add to the program, and it's highly encouraged that you do so. You can continually evolve and update this living document so that it's useful to your system. So as we evaluate the current state of assets, we're going to be asking some questions, and only you can answer these questions about your system. There are different resources to help you with these estimates, but ultimately you'll have to apply your expertise on the unique qualities of your system. So for example, a useful life for a well pump is typically about 30 years, but in areas with a lot of fine particulates such as sand and silica in the system, 5 years might be considered a good useful life for that very same pump. Some resources include manufacturer labels, system plans, engineering reports, as-built, and more. You're going to want to also categorize what type of asset you have. So is it a short-lived, which is generally replaced by cash? You could think of this like in this picture, maybe the paint, maintenance equipment, or is it long-term or long-lived? This is something that is generally financed, but it could be cash replaced. So this would be like that entire tank there. It'll also be helpful to categorize your assets. So you may want to do this by location, maybe assets at the source, assets at your pumping facility, assets associated with treatment, storage, with distribution, finally leading all the way up to the customer. Questions you'll want to answer about the current state of your assets is where is the asset located? It can be helpful to prepare a system facility map to show where they're located. And also when you're getting to this part of the process, you'll probably want to think about if your asset's located in the best possible place. Especially thinking about things like computer backups, you probably don't want to have them in the exact same place as the computer, because if something happens to the place the computer is stored, if the backup's in the same place, well, they're both going to go. Maybe also something like extra vehicle keys. I do have a little story about this one where a utility had their extra vehicle keys kept in a box in the maintenance shop. Unfortunately, the maintenance shop where the trucks were got burned down, and so the keys were stuck in that maintenance shop. They weren't able to get to them as the maintenance shop was burning. They couldn't get the cars pulled out of the building, and so they ended up losing everything. Had they kept those extra keys away from the cars, maybe in a different building, maybe they would have been able to get in there and save their vehicles. So just something to consider when you're having backups, maybe keep them stored further away from the thing that they're backing up so that if something happens to them, you still have that backup. You're also going to want to identify the number, feet, type of all important components of your utilities. You're going to want to identify the year it was installed, identify useful life, the condition, and the replacement cost. This is where it really gets data intensive, and you might have to get a little creative to determine every piece of information. You might need to consult with AWWA, so that's American Water Works Association. They have some great resources. EPA has put out some great resources, of course. I do have some at the end of this slideshow that hopefully will be helpful for that. But you might have to go and get a little creative to find some of this information, especially for our older systems where some of that information was stored in someone's brain and that person has since left. So don't get too bogged down on this part. Fill it out the best that you can. And like we've said, as you start to replace different parts of your system, all of this information will slowly start to get updated, and this is a living document that should be constantly updated anyways. When we're looking at the condition of our assets, it can be helpful to use a value system. You can think about the one that you might see at the doctor's office where 0 means you're feeling great and 10 means you're in the worst pain of your life. You can use whatever value system works for you. Determine which number means immediate replacement so that that's very clear. Color scales can also be a good visualization as well. When assessing the useful life of your asset, you'll want to look at your total useful life and then calculate the remaining useful life. If the useful life is over, when are you going to replace this item? Can it be rebuilt? Can it be refurbished? And how much that will cost, or how much will that cost? I kind of touched base on this a couple slides back, but this is an option to find helpful expected useful life information. I've got a link, so that will be with the PDF version of this presentation. You should be able to access that. EPA also has resources. Ask your engineer that you're working with, the planners that you're working with. They'll also have good resources or maybe more specific advice that works for your system. But this is a good starting point. You're also going to need to determine your asset values and replacement costs. Some places to find this information could include parts suppliers, your well drillers, engineers, talk to some neighboring systems, talk to your regulating agencies. Like here in Oregon, we've got Oregon Health Authority, and they've got regional engineers that might have current information on component costs that they've seen at other systems. So just maybe get a little creative if you don't already have this information on hand, but there are ways to figure it out. So as you've probably gathered up to this point, that collecting this data can be the biggest challenge. Some systems have facility maps and plans that can be very helpful. Bid and construction documents have some valuable information. As-built and record drawings are also very useful. Worst case, just go out there and walk the line, or get out there in the field and start documenting the things as you see them. Your experience and observation will be the most valuable piece of this information anyways. So that took us through the current state of the assets. Next, we're going to look at level of service. These are goals that should define what your customers and employees can expect from your water utility. When customers understand that what the utility is providing for them in terms of service, and they are given a say in what the utility may provide in the future, they're a lot more willing to pay. Customers need to understand that service is related to cost, and typically the higher level of service desired, the higher the cost associated with producing that level of service. Knowing your required sustainable level of service will help you implement an asset management program and communicate to stakeholders what you are doing. Quality, quantity, reliability, and environmental standards are elements that can define a level of service and associated system performance goals, both short and long term. You can use information about customer demand, data from utility commissions or boards, and information from other interested parties to develop your level of service requirements. Your level of service requirements can be updated and should be updated to account for changes due to growth, regulatory requirements, and technology improvements. Some best practices include analyzing your current and anticipated customer demand and satisfaction with the system, understanding current and anticipated regulatory requirements, writing and communicating to the public a level of service agreement that describes your system's performance targets, and using level of service standards to track system performance over time. Questions to ask related to level of service will be, what is the demand for services by my customers and other interested parties, like employees or investors? What do regulators require? What is my actual performance? And what are the physical capabilities of my assets? Quality, quantity, reliability, and environmental standards are elements that can define a level of service and associated system performance, both short and long term. As you move forward with developing and implementing your asset management plan, level of service goals can be used to track performance over time, which can help you determine asset capacity and reliability, provide transparency to customers, optimize efficiency, and ensure long-term sustainability in services. Goals can be changed or adjusted over time, as well as be added to or removed from your list. I've got a quick little activity for you, and we'll just pause and give you a moment to answer, and my next slide will have the correct answer on it. So what would be the best order of importance here for your level of service? Would you place first reliability and safety, financial viability, customer needs, or future needs first? What order do you think that these should be placed? Alright, so yes, the best order of importance here would be to place reliability and safety first, then you can focus on financial viability, then down to customer needs, and then finally you can focus on your future needs. This is the best way to prioritize activities. So your level of service should absolutely consider financial viability. This means having sufficient funds to operate, maintain, and manage your public water system on a continuing basis in full compliance with federal and state laws. Goals can be external, which will impact the customer, or they can be internal. Internal goals are those related to your water system's operations, or in other words, what your assets need to do in order to achieve the delivery of services. So your external or customer level of service values will refer to your customer's expectations for service. These are measured through tangible attributes like cost or quality of water, but also in satisfaction of customer services and public engagement. Common values include accessibility, reliability, quality, efficiency, capacity, public health and safety, sustainability and affordability, environmental impact, and public engagement. Your internal or technical level of service categories will refer to your system's internal goals of operational performance, identifying what the system and its assets need to do in order to achieve the delivery of services so that the customer will help the system staff determine gaps in track performance. Some categories you may wish to consider and find applicable when developing this level of service goal include operations, maintenance schedules, asset replacements and rehabilitation and repair, utility management, emergency response, risk management, water loss control, regulatory concerns, efficiency and capacity. There are certainly other categories and values that can be included, but try not to overcomplicate things. At the end of the day, these goals need to be meaningful to both you, your customers, and your employees. Here are a few examples of level of service goals that a system might have. It might be that they have no violations. Maybe they have a goal to get a backup generator. They have an emergency response plan and they keep it updated. They keep their personnel well trained. Maybe it is that they answer their phone within 3 rings, or they return calls within 24 hours, or they have proactive maintenance. This will really depend on your system. So through the level of service process, you need to consider that there has to be communication ongoing. So communication between management and operations, communication between the utility and the customers. This helps everyone understand what is feasible and what's wanted and needed. Communicating with customers about services the system is providing, as well as the cost associated with that service, can help you prioritize and make decisions. It's important to engage with customers when you're establishing your level of service goals. It's also important that all your policies are written and adopted, and that they're tailored to your system, and that they're written so that you can track your achievement. As a reminder, of course, the higher the level of service, the higher of cost. Having well-trained personnel, backup power, modern billing programs, all of it comes at a cost, but these costs can be partially recovered. So having well-trained personnel means that you have good service, means that you have good maintenance, maybe you're replacing things less often. I've got a little example here, so consider the change from hauling water from a creek or a well to a household to having untreated piped water to the house. This change provided a higher level of service but comes at a cost. Then going from untreated water to treated water is another increase in level of service and comes at an additional cost. Moving to modern water systems with treatment, disinfection, pumping, piping, fire hydrants, and storage tanks that provide safe, reliable quality of service greatly increase the level of service provided as well as the cost. However, in considering an individual goal, the tie between level of service and cost may not be quite as direct. In some cases, goals can be created so that the cost stays the same or even potentially decreases if the system is able to gain some efficiency. Next, we will move on to identifying your critical assets. Because assets fail, how you manage the consequences of failure is vital. Not every asset presents the same failure risk or is equally critical to your water system's operations. Therefore, it's important to know which assets are required to sustain your water system's performance. Critical assets are those you decide have a high risk of failing, so maybe they're old or in poor condition, and major consequences if they do fail. So they're a major expense, they could result in system failure or safety concerns. You can decide how critical each asset is and rank them accordingly. Many water systems have already accomplished this type of analysis through their vulnerability assessment. So in identifying the importance of your assets, you're really the only one that knows how important that asset is, and is it critical or is it for redundancy? If it's out for 24 hours, will you lose water? Do you have to have a boil water notice? Are you able to support redundancies? Some example of redundant assets could be having standby pipes that can engage when the main pump fails, having multiple water sources, having backup storage tanks, redundant pipelines and treatment facilities. This ensures uninterrupted operation and sometimes is part of regulatory compliance. Identifying the criticality of assets has us ask ourselves, what is the probability of failure? And when we're asking that, we want to consider the history, the age, the material, the condition, and the different trends of that asset. So one way to assess the asset's criticality is to set up that matrix or a criticality table, kind of like we saw a few slides back, where we're ranking from 1 to 5 on the consequence of failure and the probability of failure, and using this numerical ranking system to determine which of the assets are extremely critical. So your high critical assets are going to be those ones with those higher value numbers closer to 25 in this case. The next step is looking at your minimum life cycle cost, which means managing a water system's assets in a way that delivers the best long-term value, not just the lowest upfront cost. It includes planning for the full cost of owning, operating, maintaining, and eventually replacing assets over their entire lifespan. For small systems, this helps ensure limited funds are used wisely and sustainably. Life cycle costing analysis is a comprehensive approach to evaluating the total costs associated with an asset throughout its entire lifespan. It goes beyond initial purchase or installation expenses and considers all expenses incurred over the asset's life, including operation, maintenance, and disposal costs. This analysis is a key asset management tool that takes into account the whole life implications of planning, acquiring, operating, maintaining, and disposing of an asset. The process is an evaluation method that considers all ownership and management costs. In accounting, life cycle costing involves gathering all the expenses an asset will generate throughout its existence. This encompasses the initial investment, future additional investments, recurring annual costs, and disposal expenses. Efficiently managing an asset's life cycle enhances its longevity and functionality. Collecting information about assets provides insights into their current status in the life cycle, improving overall system efficiency and the level of service. So why is life cycle costing analysis important in asset management? It holds significant importance in asset management because it enables a comprehensive consideration of all the costs considered with an asset, like we said, throughout its entire life. Unlike focusing on solely its immediate purchase costs, the life cycle costing emphasizes a holistic, long-term approach, including operation, maintenance, repair, monitoring, rehabilitating, and again, disposal. So neglecting operational expenses while concentrating only on the capital expenses limits an organization's ability to optimize its life cycle costs. Without proper attention to life cycle costing, a system might face unexpected challenges such as higher than anticipated costs and additional training needs or increased staffing requirements. This approach ensures a thorough understanding of expenses and aids in making informed decisions for efficient and cost-effective asset management. So some factors considered in life cycle costing include some of these on the slide here. So that would be your initial capital cost. That is the upfront expenses associated when you purchase the asset, covering that purchase, installation, and any other initial upfront costs. The annual operating costs considers the ongoing costs related to the asset's operation, including expenses for energy consumption and regular maintenance. Periodic replacements consider the assets that certain components of the asset may need to be replaced or refurbished at scheduled intervals, and these costs are factored into the life cycle analysis. Any additions and alterations would include any modifications or upgrades that are made to the asset during the service life and are included in this analysis. Use costs, so this would encompass expenses directly related to utilizing the asset, such as training, monitoring, any additional costs incurred during regular operation. And then there's salvage value, so that is the potential value that can be recovered from the asset at the end of its useful life. either through resale or recycling. And then of course you don't want to forget the cost of disposing the item. A lot of these things aren't something you can just throw away. So there's going to be a process to getting rid of some of this equipment that can be costly and needs to be considered. This image here shows a really good visualization for the life cycle of an asset. So as you can see, the condition stays the same at the beginning, so during the planning and design phase, as well as the construction and manufacturing phase. But as soon as a piece of equipment is installed and starts running, its condition starts to slowly decrease. Eventually you see in the middle that there's a rehabilitation, so that brings its condition back up for a bit, and then it decreases again because, as we know, all assets are running and eventually will fail. It goes all the way down to the point where it is in decommission and renewal. And so you can see on the horizontal axis the service life and the condition rating changing over time. It's just a good visualization of what this life cycle of an asset looks like. Considering the full life cycle cost of an asset helps you move from reactive maintenance to predictive. It helps you to know the costs and benefits of rehabilitation versus replacement of the asset. It helps you to deploy resources based on your asset's conditions, and it helps you to analyze possible asset failures and develop specific response plans. So trying to move from reactive to proactive to predictive maintenance. Reactive maintenance operates on that run to failure philosophy that minimizes maintenance time and investment. Proactive maintenance, on the other hand, takes steps to anticipate and resolve problems before they occur. Proactive maintenance leverages data, often utilizing computerized maintenance management systems software to determine the underlying cause of faulty equipment. This approach seeks to reduce your overall machine and repair costs and extend the life of your equipment by addressing potential problems before they arise. If it's done correctly, repairs can be limited because you're aggressively tracking key performance indicators at all times. This method ensures you're performing routine maintenance only when it's necessary. That's because the collected data can reveal trends and provide performance metrics on an ongoing basis through a web-based system accessible to your entire team. Ultimately, the goal of proactive maintenance is to reduce downtime, ensure you're getting the most out of your equipment for as long as possible, and hopefully eliminate the need for costly and time-consuming repairs. Predictive maintenance uses condition monitoring to analyze the state of your equipment and perform online maintenance before machines break down. Sure, predicting the future may be a fool's errand, but in the realm of facilities management, predictive maintenance is easier and more cost-effective than ever before. The goal is to reduce costs and eliminate downtime caused by unexpected machine maintenance. So instead of reacting to unforeseen events, you'll be able to maintain a proper schedule, eliminating surprises and exorbitant downtime costs. You're also putting more information in the hands of your maintenance staff, who will already have a diagnosis and can begin addressing problems more expeditiously. While both proactive and predictive maintenance do appear to do the same thing, the truth is they are different. So proactive maintenance endeavors to get to the root cause of a potential problem, while predictive maintenance collects relevant data to appropriately schedule routine fixes and ensure equipment is operating effectively. Employing scheduled maintenance for different operation and maintenance tasks is a way to improve your minimum life cycle cost. And so you'll want to consider maybe daily, weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, semi-annually, biannually, different types of scales for different tasks. So for example, if you have a bunch of valves that you know you need to exercise annually, maybe you want to space it out to where you exercise a few each month instead of doing all of them the same month every year, if that makes sense. And this is just a visualization to show you where proactive, predictive, and reactive domain fall, kind of like throughout a system condition's life. And so that proactive is way ahead of the game, considering the system before failure, making sure that cost is as low as possible. The predictive domain has a little bit of a higher cost associated with it. We're kind of in the weeds of things. The system is starting to fail a little bit, but we're staying ahead of it a little bit. Once we get into that reactive domain, they're really only responding at failure. And so the cost is as high as it possibly can be, and things can be a lot worse to manage. So So the last step here is looking at our long-term funding plan. Sound financial decisions in developing an effective long-term funding strategy are critical to the implementation of an asset management program. Knowing the full economic costs and revenues generated by your water system will enable you to determine your system's financial forecast. Your system's financial forecast can then help you decide what changes need to be made to your system's long-term funding strategy. So during this process, we have inventoried our assets, we have reviewed our service policies, and we've looked at replacement schedules, hopefully, and then we're ready to determine the needed reserve accounts, determine funding sources, and translate all of the above information into rates. Due to the fluctuation of available federal and state funding, it is only possible to forecast funding availability from these sources for a short period of time when budgets are known, and difficult to forecast for periods over time through which your capital improvement program extends. You want to consider if maybe you're eligible for a grant. This would be tied to your median household income, or MHI, and the affordability of your current rates. If your rates are too low, in many places they look at the rates being too low if they're less than 2% of the MHI or 2% affordability index. So if your rates are too low, then you'll be rated lower because the funder isn't going to be confident that your system is financially sustainable. Lots of preparation is required to get funding, so you're going to want to plan ahead and learn about prioritization of funding. Prioritization of funding for water system projects refers to how federal, state, or other funding agencies decide which projects receive money first and when there isn't enough funding to support all requests. This process helps ensure that limited public funds go to the highest need or most impactful projects. So typically it works by, they start with scoring and ranking systems. Most funders will use a scoring system to evaluate applications based on specific criteria, such as risk to public health, regulatory compliance, affordability and disadvantaged status, readiness to proceed, or regional or environmental impact. After the scoring and ranking system, then the project will go onto the intended use plan and priority list. So for programs like the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, each state publishes an annual intended use plan, which includes a priority list of projects. Only those projects on the priority list are eligible for that year's funding, and projects are funded in the order based on available money and readiness. After that, there's application. So even if the project scores well, timing matters. If a system doesn't have matching funds or hasn't submitted the right documentation, you might miss out and be bumped in favor of a lower scoring project that's already ready to go. And this also, the next piece of this will be political or emergency influences. So sometimes urgent needs like natural disasters, emergency failures, or political pressures can lead to exceptions or expedited funding, even if a project wasn't at the top of the list. The bottom line is funding prioritization is about matching public dollars with the projects that best protect public health, serve underserved communities, and are ready for implementation. For small utilities, understanding a funding agency's scoring system and preparing strong, complete applications is the key to rising to the top of the list. To make an asset management plan truly useful, it needs to be tied to realistic, data-driven financial planning, starting with a factual budget. A factual budget reflects the actual cost of operating and maintaining a system, including the full staffing, true equipment needs, and all recurring costs. It avoids wishful thinking or underestimating expenses just to keep rates low. It uses past data to inform current and future decisions. From there, we create financial projections that look forward. These projections should include annual expenses, scheduled debt repayments, or future loans, and expected inflation. This will give us a financial roadmap that aligns with our capital improvement plan and the replacement schedules identified in the asset inventory. When we combine the asset management plan with a factual, forward-looking budget, we get a clear picture of what rates actually need to be. This helps leadership make the case for rate increases before a crisis, rather than reacting to emergencies or failing infrastructure. It also supports transparency with your community. You can show how the rates connect to specific system needs and planned improvements. Rates need to be adjusted regularly to keep up with rising costs, aging infrastructure, and changing service demands. If your rates don't cover the true cost of service, including operations, maintenance, debt, and future replacements, the system risks falling into financial instability. It's essential that the board understands how rates are calculated and why adjustments are needed, so that they can make informed decisions and clearly communicate the reasoning to the community. Regularly reviewing and updating rates is a key part of the long-term sustainability and responsible governance. An important tip I want to leave you with for sure today is to keep in touch with your funders. They typically cycle funding every year, and their criteria does change. One thing for certain though is you're going to want to have good financials, show stewardship of your utility, and have some reserves set aside. Some best practices to support your long-term funding plan include creating and following a budget, creating and funding dedicated asset reserves, regularly revising your rate structure, and attending educational workshops. Another good best practice is to have a 6-year budget. Especially if you apply for state revolving funding, they'll want to see that you have a 6-year budget. So for this, you're going to want to take 3 to 4 years of past data and then average this out and project out 6 years. Budget projections should include your annual expenses, new loans, and don't forget to include inflation. You'll want to base this budget on true expenses and reserve needs, including your asset management. I mentioned inflation on the last slide. So inflation is that erosion of spending power caused by an increase of the price of commodities and consumer goods. I think we're all probably more intimately aware of inflation than we want to be. But I do have this CPI inflation calculator that has a good way of understanding how inflation is impacting us. I'm not able to do a live demo with a calculator, so I did find this visualization here that shows the effects of inflation. It shows what $100 will be worth at different time periods. So it just shows you what the $100 is worth and to maintain your purchasing power what you would need. And as you can see, over this time of 50 years, it makes a very big difference. And a lot of the assets at our systems are probably about 50 years old. So just a lot of things to consider with looking at the cost of your system and the different equipment and components of it. We don't want to forget inflation. You'll want to make sure that your budget is based on written assumptions. You don't want to just have assumptions that don't have any basis. If someone else is looking at your budget, they should know exactly what the story is. You're going to want to have your decisions driven by data, by sound and accurate data. Having a 6-year budget will show where needed rate increases will be, and it also creates another source of public information. Another important point I want to leave you with when we're talking about the long-term funding plan is this quote from the Water Board Bible, that board members have a fiduciary duty to assure that systems revenues cover the true cost of water delivered. It doesn't say board members have a fiduciary duty to keep the rates as low as possible. Keeping rates as low as possible is a recipe for failure, as it starts a slippery slope to decay and disappointment. Leave the world a better place. Don't have short-sighted goals to appease people today, but rather have long-term goals that ensure sustainability. Chances are you've heard comments like, the board's job is to keep rates down. They'd vote us out if we raised rates. We haven't raised rates in 15 years and we're proud of it. We have a lot of folks on fixed income who can't afford to pay more. If you have heard comments like this, you're not alone. No board member truly wants to raise rates, and certainly no one enjoys having them raised. If rates are reviewed annually as part of the budgeting process, they can be adjusted in small, annual increments instead of in infrequent but large increases. Customers are much more likely to be unhappy with an increase every few years of 10%, 20%, or even as high as 50% than they would be if they were to have 1 to 4% increases every year. After all, most people's incomes increase slowly year to year and not in big jumps every few years. So why should things that they pay for, like your utilities, jump in price suddenly and unpredictably? So that's it, folks. We've gone through the 5 core questions of the asset management framework. A little reminder for your first steps, you'll want to start by getting your key people together, building a team of great resources that you can lean into to fill out your asset management questions. You're going to want to have outreach to the community so they're aware of what you're doing and why you're doing it. It's helpful to choose a model or template. RCAC has a great asset management model. Please reach out to me, and hopefully in the Q&A I can bring that up again. Begin with an asset inventory, so just going through and inventorying all the assets that you have. In some case, this is taking your phone or an iPad out there and taking notes out in the field. And then start to write and adopt level of service policies or review the policies that you have. To highlight some key takeaways here, your asset management should produce a visual picture of the condition, location, and replacement of your assets. The plan should support a budget and your rates. There are tools and assistance to help you get started, and the first step is to get everyone on board. And just a refresher of this really nifty way to look at risk as a function of criticality versus condition, or a function of consequence of failure times likelihood of failure, and using a numerical chart or color coding can be really helpful in categorizing these risks. Now we're at the end of the webinar today, and hopefully we met our objectives, which were to explain the benefits of your asset management program. Hopefully you now have the confidence to start your asset management program if you haven't already, and you know the first steps towards getting your asset management program completed. Just want to finish up this session with a few resources that may be helpful. In the PDF version of this presentation, these links should be live. If they're not, please reach out to me. My email will be at the end and should be at the beginning of this presentation. First resource I have here is some links to help with emergency response planning. So if you're looking into updating or creating a risk and resiliency assessment or emergency response planning, highly recommend going through and using EPA's resources here. And then I just went ahead and put these links to the templates on this slide here. They can be a little bit cumbersome to navigate through all the links on the EPA website, so I wanted a good one-stop shop for those. Another fantastic resource, of course, is the RCAP Asset Management resources, and so I've got a link to those here, and they've got tons and tons of links and resources that you can go through. Highly recommend those EPA resources. Another one we've got here is this asset management switchboard, so it really breaks down all the different pieces that you can consider. It does a deep dive into the 5 core components that we talked about today, as well as a bunch of other things. This is from the Southwest Environmental Finance Center, partnering with EPA, so these are great, reliable resource here. They've also created this really cool little quiz or scoring system here that you can go through to kind of give yourself a little grade and kind of figure out where you're at. So this is a fun exercise to go through. It'll help you identify different gaps where you should focus efforts. This is another in-depth manual that walks you through the concepts we touched on today, but in a lot more detail. I've got a link to it here. Again, huge fan of the EPA resources. This asset management handbook for small water systems is great. It actually has some really good tables for helping you to start charting those level of service goals. They've got some example tables and ranking, and like even some filled out little like scores and scenarios and things. So highly recommend downloading that and taking a look through it, especially if you're working on establishing level of service goals. EPA also has a bunch of these quick fact sheets that are really helpful to kind of refresh and get you thinking about the bigger picture ideas. And there's even more EPA asset management resources here, so I wanted to provide this link that's specific to states. There's also some links talking about the AWEA and some links to other tools as well. So as you can see, there's a plethora of tools here that you can use, especially through EPA. And then another one from EPA is this taking stock of your water system. So this is great for very small drinking water systems. It's a little older, but a lot of it is still very applicable. I talked briefly about finding the location of all of your assets, and a great way to do this is through mapping. RCAC does have GIS mapping projects, so we can help you with that if you're in the Western States and Territories. There's also Google Earth Pro, which is a great free version to get you started with mapping things. QGIS is another source, Diamond Maps, ArcGIS is probably one of the more famous ones. Just a few places to get you thinking about where and how you can map your system. I also briefly mentioned that RCAC has a really great asset management spreadsheet. It also helps you plan for reserves as well. So if you're interested in learning more about this, please reach out to me. I'm happy to provide a copy of the spreadsheet and chat with you about it. And that brings us to the end of the webinar. Thank you so much for your time. I've got my contact information here, and I think we'll be diving into the question and answer section now. So thank you guys.